2 on page 144 of the OBR's report. Obviously, there's a missing Chancellor of the Exchequer there in the form of Kwasi Kwarteng, but you inherited a fairly...
It'd be nice to block him out.
Well, I'm afraid we can't, but we inherited a fairly small headroom. If you moved rapidly to increase the headroom, as opposed to taking the trade-offs that you have taken, what would that mean for tax rises in our already stretched public services? I'm mindful that there's a vote, so I suspect Dame Meg would like us both to be quick.
Yeah, look, I mean, if we go back to the £30 billion of headroom, that would require £20 billion of tax increases. Actually, it would probably require more than £20 billion of tax increases, because if you do £20 billion of tax increases, the OBR may well assume that the economy therefore weakens, so you'd need to do even more than that. Or you would need to reverse the extra money that we've put into the NHS since the general election, the £25 billion that we put in, and as a result, the waiting lists, well, I'm afraid in Scotland actually waiting lists aren't coming down, but that's the fault of the SNP rather than this government, but we wouldn't see the falls in the hospital waiting lists. So, I think we have got the balance right. I do accept that, it is lower headroom than we had in, the earlier years of the OBR, but to rebuild it that rapidly would require changes on tax and on spending that, as a government, we would not be willing to make.
Now, another suggestion that people make, Chancellor, is we should increase borrowing. In your view, would a material increase in borrowing and a change in your fiscal rules, which would have to take place, lead to a significant increase in the cost of government borrowing?
Well, there have been numerous impacts if we increase borrowing and weren't able to deliver the economic and fiscal stability. And the first would mean that the national debt, which is already almost the size of our economy, would grow larger still, and that would increase the servicing costs of that debt, which are already £105.3 billion, I think, this year, more than we spend on the Home Office, MOJ and Defence. I would rather spend some of that £105 billion on schools and hospitals, on transport infrastructure, or indeed bringing taxes down on working people. So I do want to reduce those debt servicing costs. But also, if we were to fail to meet our fiscal rules, fail to provide the economic stability that our country needs, I don't think the Bank of England would have the same confidence to cut interest rates that they have the last few months. Interest rates down 3 times in just 9 months, and that would mean higher borrowing costs for all of our constituents, whether those are families with mortgages or businesses borrowing to grow their business. So, I want to bring down the levels of borrowing. I want to bring down the levels of debt, and that's what the OBR confirmed that we are doing as a government.
Okay, and so if we're out in Bramley or Broomhouse in my seat, what you'd say is higher mortgage rates for people, higher cost of finance for big investments in energy infrastructure and so on, and lower economic growth. That's what would eventuate from greater.
And I think that constituents of yours in Glasgow and mine in Leeds West and Pudsey, actually don't need the OBR or their MP to tell them that, because it's what happened a few years ago, where the cost of borrowing for businesses and families went through the roof. Uncertainty was all around us, and it constrained the ability of our economy to grow. We've returned stability to the economy. That is the platform on which we can grow the economy.
Now, another lever that's suggested is tax. So, first suggestion is a wealth tax, which would take time and obviously be complicated to implement. What's the Treasury's thoughts on a wealth tax at the minute?
Well, I'd just say on that, in the budget last year, we increased sort of 2 sort of broad types of tax. We increased national insurance on business, which we've already discussed. We also increased taxes on the most wealthy. The reforms to the non-dom tax status will bring in £12 billion during the course of this Parliament. VAT on private schools would bring in £9 billion during the course of this Parliament. The energy profits levy on the large profits, the energy companies making £2.3 billion. The higher rate additional dwelling on stamp duty, land tax, £1.2 billion. And the thing that these sort of taxes are: the capital gains tax increase, £8.9 billion. Inheritance tax changes about just over £5 billion. The point is these taxes, by their nature, fall on more wealthy people. And so my argument would be that we did already increase significantly taxes on the wealthiest in the budget last year. Now the focus has got to be on growing the economy and reform of public services, as well as spending wisely the additional investment, including the £25 billion into the NHS in this Parliament.
And another tax suggestion people make is on council tax and revaluation or additional bans. See that from the IFS and others. What are the current Treasury thinking on that?
Well, look, some councils wanted to significantly increase their council tax this month, and we have resisted calls from a number of councils, including Windsor and Maidenhead and Slough, who wanted to increase their council tax significantly, because we do recognise the ongoing pressures on living standards and the cost of living crisis that people have gone through. So, we want taxes on working people to be as low as possible. It's why, despite the difficult decisions in the budget last year, working people in their pay slips won't be paying any additional tax.
And any thoughts on more fundamental reform, or is that for another day?
That's not something that we're looking at the moment.
And final question from me. The real way out of this is economic growth, is it not? Yeah. And that's what we need much, much more of. Are you satisfied that the regulators and others in Britain are moving fast enough to deregulate to get that growth that we need, or are you wanting greater and faster progress?
I think that all the officials in the Treasury and meet me know that I want to go further and faster on pretty much everything we're doing, including on the regulation agenda. And we've taken out 2 regulators already. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is abolishing the biggest quango in the world at NHS England, and we've set that target of a 25% reduction in the admin costs of regulation during the course of this Parliament. We are also trying to streamline, and Steve Reed at DEFRA is leading this work on the environmental regulations, which hold up so much of the investment in infrastructure, particularly in housing, that we need to see. So, look, it's right that we have regulations to protect citizens, to protect consumers, but I do think that the balance has shifted too far, and regulation now too often stops things from happening rather than enabling things to happen. If we want to build the homes, if we want the energy security, particularly in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if we want better transport links without the excessive costs, for example, that we saw with HS2, then we need to make it easier to build, and we need to reform the regulatory system. And that's what the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is setting out to do. It's also what our drive on regulation is determined to do.
Okay, thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Dame Meg.
Before leaving, we request everyone to like and share this video so
what we witnessed today was not a moment of clarity, but a masterclass in managed deflection, a government trying to convince the public that there are no real alternatives, only hard trade-offs and impossible choices. 1. The hard but necessary excuse. The Chancellor framed the economic landscape as a binary: either raise taxes, slash spending, or borrow irresponsibly. But what he avoided entirely was the real elephant in the room: a serious overhaul of the tax system that ensures the wealthiest and biggest corporations contribute fairly. His reference to taxing non-DOMs and energy profits was more cosmetic than structural, headline moves without long-term substance. 2. The politics of fear. There was a clear attempt to frighten the public with talk of ballooning debt interest payments, now over £105 billion, as though this justifies austerity. But there was no reflection on why debt servicing is so high in the first place. Is it due to public investment in communities? Or the cost of bailing out corporate failure while ordinary families foot the bill? 3. Passing the buck. The jab at the Scottish Government over NHS waiting lists was predictable, a diversion tactic that ignores the broader systemic issues across the entire UK. Central government cannot claim credit for successes and disown responsibility for failures in the same breath. 4. Deregulation as a silver bullet. The Chancellor's solution to growth. Gut regulation. The implication was that planning laws and environmental protections are to blame for sluggish growth, rather than chronic underinvestment or political instability. Deregulation without accountability doesn't unlock prosperity, it risks creating short-term gains at the expense of long-term standards. 5. A deafening silence on inequality. Nowhere in the press conference was there serious talk of social justice, tackling poverty, or investing in long-neglected communities. Growth alone won't solve these problems, especially if that growth is captured by the top 1% while everyone else treads water. Bottom line. This press conference showed a government running on autopilot, constrained not by economic reality but by political cowardice. The public is being told to accept less investment, less vision, less ambition, all in the name of fiscal discipline. But without bold reform, we're not stabilizing the economy. We're just managing its decline.